"Sir, this area is for invited guests only." The words sliced through the gallery like crystal breaking. The elderly man in the worn blazer froze, his weathered hands trembling slightly as security blocked his path. Around him, champagne flutes clinked among designer suits and evening gowns, the exclusive timepiece exhibition glittering under precisely arranged lighting. Giuseppe Marchetti had spent 57 years crafting watches, his fingers creating the very Chronos Legacy model displayed on the central pedestal, the one commanding reverent whispers from the collectors circling it like worshippers. Yet, here he stood, invisible. 3 security guards now surrounded him, their earpieces more expensive than his shoes. A ripple of uncomfortable glances spread among the guests, some averting their eyes, others watching with thinly veiled amusement. From the corner of the room, a figure in a perfectly tailored Tom Ford suit paused mid-conversation, lowering his champagne. Robert Downey Jr.'s eyes narrowed slightly as he observed the scene unfolding. The auction would begin in 20 minutes, starting bids at $8 million for works created by hands now being escorted toward the exit. The injustice hung in the air like expensive perfume, noticeable to everyone, acknowledged by no one. Until now, Giuseppe didn't struggle as they guided him toward the door. His dignity remained intact, though his heart broke with each step away from his creation. 57 years of dedication, 17 months on this particular timepiece alone, each microscopic gear hand-finished, each complication a testament to human ingenuity. The Chronos Legacy wasn't just a watch. It was the culmination of his life's work. "I only wanted to see it displayed," he explained softly to the security guard, his Italian accent thickening with emotion. "I designed the perpetual moon phase mechanism." The guard's expression remained impassive, trained to see threats rather than stories, to protect assets rather than honor their creators. Behind them, guests sipped Krug from crystal flutes, discussing investment portfolios and appreciation rates. To them, the Chronos was another asset class, mechanical art as financial instrument. None had noticed the 13 constellation markers Giuseppe had hidden within the face design, representing his grandchildren. None knew that the unusual bridge configuration was a tribute to his late wife Maria, echoing the arch of her favorite bridge in Venice where they'd first met. To these collectors, craftsmanship was valuable, but craftsmen were irrelevant. Robert Downey Jr. tracked the old man's retreat, recognition flickering across his face. As someone who'd experienced both spectacular falls and redemptive rises, he recognized authenticity when he saw it. The watchmaker's worn blazer with leather elbow patches, his calloused hands with slight tremors, not from age, but from decades of precision work, told a story no marketing campaign could manufacture. "Excuse me," Downey murmured to the Swiss banking executive mid-anecdote. He set his untouched champagne on a passing tray and moved through the crowd with practiced ease, nodding acknowledgments without stopping. Several guests attempted to intercept him. A tech billionaire, a Saudi prince, a studio head, but he navigated past them all with the social dexterity of someone who had learned that true value rarely announced itself loudly. "That's Giuseppe Marchetti," whispered an elegant woman to her companion, recognition dawning. "His cathedral tourbillon design revolutionized the industry." The exhibition curator, Xavier Beaumont, overheard this comment and glanced nervously toward the exit. A disdainful smile crossed his face as he adjusted his Savile Row suit and tapped his own timepiece, a competitor's model, before returning to his rehearsed speech about exclusivity and provenance. At the gallery entrance, Giuseppe fumbled with his worn overcoat. Though the spring evening was mild, a chill had settled into his bones, the familiar cold of invisibility. He'd experienced this before, watching from shadows as collectors bid millions for his creations while he remained unknown. This time was different only because he'd hoped foolishly perhaps, to witness the public unveiling of his masterpiece. "My grandfather had a saying," came a voice behind him. "The world's most valuable things are worthless without the stories behind them." Giuseppe turned to find Robert Downey Jr. extending a hand. "I'm Robert, and you're Giuseppe Marchetti, if I'm not mistaken, the genius behind the Kronos legacy." The security guards' postures transformed instantly, confusion and embarrassment replacing their authoritarian stance. The younger one shifted uncomfortably, suddenly uncertain of protocol when a global celebrity was treating the man they were ejecting with reverence. Nearby guests paused in their conversations, attention drawn to the unexpected interaction. Phones appeared discreetly, capturing the moment. "You know my work?" Giuseppe asked, his voice barely above a whisper, weather-worn face illuminated with surprise. "Know it?" Downey smiled, the charisma that had powered billion-dollar franchises now focused entirely on the craftsman. "Sir, I've studied it. And I believe you've been invited to the wrong side of the velvet rope." Whispers rippled through the gallery as Robert Downey Jr. guided Giuseppe back inside, his hand respectfully at the elder man's elbow. The security team, now transformed from barriers to escorts, flanked them awkwardly. Phones captured every moment, social media algorithms already calculating the viral potential of what was unfolding. "That's the actual Marchetti?" asked one collector to another, recognition dawning. "I had no idea he was still alive," replied his companion, the irony of discussing the craftsman as a historical figure while he stood among them, lost on both. Xavier Beaumont, the exhibition curator, moved swiftly to intercept them, his practiced smile strained at the edges. "Mr. Downey, such an honor to have you with us tonight. Perhaps I can show you our premium displays personally." His eyes flicked dismissively to Giuseppe, communicating clearly that this intrusion was unwelcome. "Perfect timing, Xavier," Downey replied, his smile pleasant but his eyes sharp. "I was just telling Mr. Marchetti how much I admire the cathedral-inspired bridges in the Kronos. The way they echo Gothic architecture while maintaining structural integrity is revolutionary." Giuseppe's eyes widened slightly. Few people, even among collectors, understood that particular design element. The curator's smile faltered as he realized Downey actually knew horology, not as a status symbol, but as an art form. Perhaps Giuseppe himself could explain the inspiration behind the constellation markers. Downey continued, intentionally using the watchmaker's first name while addressing the curator formally. "I've always wondered about the specific arrangement." The power dynamic in the room shifted subtly but unmistakably. Guests who moments ago had ignored Giuseppe now edged closer, drawn by both celebrity gravity and the realization that they were in the presence of the creator himself. Beaumont's composure cracked further as he found himself unable to refuse without appearing ignorant about his own exhibition's centerpiece. "Of course," he managed through gritted teeth, "though our schedule is quite tight before the auction begins. I'm sure everyone would appreciate a brief education from the master himself," Downey countered smoothly. His phone buzzed in his pocket, likely his publicist already aware of the developing situation, but he ignored it, focusing entirely on the moment unfolding. They approached the central display where the Kronos legacy rested on its rotating pedestal, bathed in precisely calibrated lighting. Giuseppe's breath caught visibly at the sight of his creation displayed so prominently. His hands, tools that had shaped mechanical poetry, trembled slightly as they hovered near the case, not touching but connecting nonetheless. "May I?" Giuseppe asked Beaumont, gesturing to the sealed display case. "That's not possible," the curator responded automatically. "Insurance regulations strictly prohibit—" "I believe," Downey interrupted, his voice carrying just enough to draw the attention of nearby guests without seeming confrontational, that the creator of a masterpiece should have the right to touch his own work. Unless there's some reason why the man who made this watch with his own hands shouldn't be trusted with it. Smartphones documented every moment as the curator's face flushed. A woman in haute couture whispered to her companion, "Is this being recorded?" "It's spectacular." "The insurance policy specifically," Beaumont began. Beaumont's composure cracked further as he found himself unable to refuse without appearing ignorant about his own exhibition centerpiece. "Of course," he managed through gritted teeth, "though our schedule is quite tight before the auction begins. I'm sure everyone would appreciate a brief education from the master himself," Downey countered smoothly. His phone buzzed in his pocket, likely his publicist already aware of the developing situation, but he ignored it, focusing entirely on the moment unfolding. They approached the central display where the Chronos Legacy rested on its rotating pedestal, bathed in precisely calibrated lighting. Giuseppe's breath caught visibly at the sight of his creation displayed so prominently. His hands, tools that had shaped mechanical poetry, trembled slightly as they hovered near the case, not touching but connecting nonetheless. "May I?" Giuseppe asked Beaumont, gesturing to the sealed display case. "That's not possible," the curator responded automatically. "Insurance regulations strictly prohibit—" "I believe," Downey interrupted, his voice carrying just enough to draw the attention of nearby guests without seeming confrontational, "that the creator of a masterpiece should have the right to touch his own work. Unless there's some reason why the man who made this watch with his own hands shouldn't be trusted with it." Smartphones documented every moment as the curator's face flushed. A woman in haute couture whispered to her companion, "Is this being recorded?" "It's spectacular." "The insurance policy specifically," Beaumont began. "I'll personally cover any potential damage," Downey said, the casual way he offered millions in guarantee making several guests murmur appreciatively. "Though I doubt the man who crafted each component will damage his life's work." He turned to address the now substantial crowd that had gathered. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have an unprecedented opportunity tonight. Instead of just buying art, we can actually understand it from its creator." The crowd had grown, drawn by the magnetic combination of celebrity presence and unexpected drama. Tension hung in the air as Beaumont visibly calculated his options. Refusing risked public embarrassment. Acquiescing undermined his authority. After a painful pause, he produced a security card and motioned to a white-gloved assistant. 10 minutes, he conceded coldly. "The auction cannot be delayed." As the assistant carefully removed the Chronos Legacy from its case, Giuseppe's eyes shone with undisguised emotion. The watch, a symphony of platinum, gold, and sapphire crystal, caught the light with deliberate brilliance, its complications promising to track celestial movements accurately for centuries. "I finished this piece on my grandson's birthday," Giuseppe said, his voice gaining strength as he slipped into the passion of his craft. He accepted the timepiece reverently, his weathered fingers knowing precisely how to hold the creation. "See this constellation pattern in the subdial? That's Orion, his namesake." The guests leaned closer, suddenly seeing beyond the object's monetary value to its humanity. Giuseppe turned the watch gently, pointing out details invisible to casual observation. "The lunar phase disk contains actual silver from Maria's grandmother's brooch. My wife, she passed before seeing this completed." A respectful silence fell. Even Beaumont seemed momentarily sobered by the emotional weight behind the mechanical masterpiece. "And this bridge configuration," Downey prompted gently. "You mentioned it was inspired by Gothic architecture?" "Yes, but specifically by the Rialto Bridge." Giuseppe smiled, memory softening his features. Where I first saw Maria in 1962. I proposed there 7 years later. The atmosphere in the gallery transformed. What had been a transaction, the selling of luxury goods to wealthy collectors, became something else entirely. A communion between creator and creation, between art and meaning, witnessed by those who suddenly understood they weren't just buying an object, but becoming custodians of a story. Beaumont checked his watch pointedly. The auction will commence in 5 minutes. Please return the piece to its display. The auction room buzzed with anticipation, the energy fundamentally altered from mere hours before. Collectors who had come to acquire status symbols now whispered about provenance and passion. Giuseppe had been given a seat in the front row, Robert Downey Jr.'s doing, though Beaumont had initially attempted to relegate him to standing room at the back. Lot 17, The Chronos Legacy by Marchetti, announced the auctioneer, a distinguished Englishman with impeccable diction. A revolutionary perpetual calendar with moon phase and cathedral tourbillon. Starting bid $8 million. Paddles rose immediately. 9 million. 10. 12. The figures climbed with dizzying speed as collectors competed not just for ownership, but for connection to the story they'd witnessed unfolding. Giuseppe watched with quiet amazement as his creation, into which he'd poured his skill, but for which he'd been paid a mere fraction of these sums, became the center of a financial battlefield. 18 million to the gentleman from Dubai, the auctioneer noted professionally. Robert Downey Jr. hadn't raised his paddle once, instead watching the reactions of both the bidders and Giuseppe himself. The elderly craftsman's expression revealed complex emotions. Pride in his work's recognition, melancholy at its permanent departure, wonder at the spectacle unfolding. 22 million to the phone bidder from Singapore. The room grew tense as the bidding slowed, paddles lowering as the stratospheric price exceeded even these wealthy collectors' limits. The auctioneer poised his gavel, prepared to close the sale. Do I hear 23 million? 22,500,000? 25 million, came Downey's clear voice, his paddle finally rising. A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. The bid was millions beyond the expected ceiling. Beaumont's eyes widened, his earlier dismissiveness now seeming painfully short-sighted. 25 million from Mr. Downey, the auctioneer confirmed, unable to completely mask his surprise. Do I hear 26? Silence fell. The phone bidder declined to continue. 25 million, going once. Giuseppe's hands gripped his knees, knuckles white. His life's masterpiece was seconds from disappearing into a private collection. Going twice. I have a question before you close, Downey announced, standing. Protocol dictated that bidding proceed without interruption, but few would deny Robert Downey Jr. a moment to speak. I'd like to know what percentage of this sale goes to the actual creator of this masterpiece. The silence that followed was deafening. Beaumont shifted uncomfortably, whispering urgently to an assistant. The auctioneer looked uncertain for the first time all evening. That's confidential information regarding the consignment agreement, the auctioneer finally managed. Let me guess, Downey continued, his casual tone belying the challenge in his words. Less than 1%? Perhaps a flat fee paid years ago when this gentleman needed to support his family, with no consideration for the eventual value his genius would create. Phones recorded everything as the uncomfortable truth settled over the room. Many collectors suddenly couldn't meet Giuseppe's gaze. Mr. Downey, we must proceed with, Beaumont began. I'll withdraw my bid, Downey announced, unless Mr. Marchetti receives a significant portion of the proceeds, let's say 50%, and permanent recognition as the creator, including in all future sales and displays. The auction room erupted into chaos. Beaumont conferred frantically with executives while the auctioneer repeatedly requested order. Giuseppe sat stunned, the full import of what was happening slowly dawning on him. "This is highly irregular," protested a representative from the watch brand. "The creator was compensated according to industry standards. His contract—" "His contract," Downey interrupted, his voice cutting through the din, "was signed when he needed to feed his family, when powerful companies knew they could exploit his genius because he had no choice but to accept their terms." He turned to address the room at large. "We celebrate creativity but systematically undervalue creators. We pay millions for objects while ignoring the hands that made them." Several collectors murmured in agreement, the uncomfortable truth resonating. Others shifted defensively, perhaps seeing reflections of similar practices in their own industries. "I've been on both sides of this equation," Downey continued, his authenticity palpable. "I've been the desperate artist taking whatever was offered, and I've been fortunate enough to become powerful enough to set my own terms. The difference isn't talent, it's leverage." He turned to Giuseppe. "Mr. Marchetti created something timeless, something that will still tell perfect time when everyone in this room is dust. That deserves more than a footnote in the authentication papers." The executives huddled in urgent consultation. The bid was unprecedented and losing it would be catastrophic, yet the demand challenged their entire business model. The audience watched, captivated, as the drama played out beneath crystal chandeliers. Finally, the brand representative stepped forward. "We can offer 15% to Mr. Marchetti as an extraordinary exception, with acknowledgement of his contribution." 40%, Downey countered without hesitation, with his name engraved on the case alongside the brand and his story included in all future documentation. His legacy deserves to be as permanent as his creation. The agreement was reached in full view of the astonished audience. 30% to Giuseppe, his name permanently associated with the Chronos legacy, and his story featured prominently in all marketing materials. The auction concluded with Downey's winning bid of $25 million, nearly triple the watch's estimated value. As cameras flashed and the crowd applauded, Giuseppe's weathered face showed something beyond happiness: vindication. "The auction will take a 15-minute intermission," announced the auctioneer, attempting to restore normalcy to an event that had transcended mere commerce. As the crowd dispersed for refreshments, buzzing with excitement over what they'd witnessed, Downey guided Giuseppe away from the press and curious onlookers to a quiet corner of the gallery. "Why did you do this?" Giuseppe asked, his voice thick with emotion. "You don't know me." "I know your work," Downey replied simply, "and I recognize something in you that resonated with me." He paused, considering his words carefully. "There was a time in my life when I was dismissed, when people saw my past instead of my potential, when I had to fight to be valued for what I could create rather than mistakes I'd made." Giuseppe nodded slowly, understanding passing between them. "Besides," Downey added with a slight smile, "I've played geniuses on screen often enough to recognize the real thing when I see it." By morning, video of the auction had gone viral. Respect the Creator and Downey Justice trended globally. News segments featured experts discussing the exploitation of artisans in luxury industries. The watch brand's PR team scrambled to position themselves as champions of craftspeople, announcing a new Creators Equity program that would ensure fair compensation for all their artisans. 3 days later, Giuseppe Marchetti sat in his modest workshop outside Milan, surrounded by the tools he'd used for nearly 6 decades. The check, representing more money than he'd earned in his entire career, lay on his workbench, still undeposited. More meaningful than the money was the stack of commission requests that had arrived from collectors worldwide, each wanting a piece directly from his hands, each willing to pay him what his craft was truly worth. His phone rang, a new smartphone sent by Downey's assistant to replace his ancient flip phone. Giuseppe answered hesitantly, still uncomfortable with the technology. "Mr. Marchetti, CNN International calling. We'd like to schedule your interview about changes in the luxury watch industry." After declining politely, he returned to the half-finished movement on his bench. His hands, steadier now with validation rather than anxiety, made microscopic adjustments to a balance spring. A notification appeared on his tablet, also a gift from Downey, showing the actor had posted a photo of the Chronos Legacy on his wrist. The caption read, "Wearing Time Crafted by Genius. Honored to own a Marchetti. 30 million likes and counting." 6 months later, Giuseppe stood nervously at the entrance of Switzerland's most prestigious watchmaking school. Behind him, 15 young artisans from across Italy waited, recipients of the Marchetti Fellowship, funded by a portion of his auction proceeds. None could have afforded this education otherwise, just as he couldn't 60 years earlier. "Ready?" asked the school's director, who now treated the once invisible craftsman with profound respect. Giuseppe nodded, emotion constricting his throat as he led his protégés inside. In the main hall hung a poster, the Chronos Legacy beside Giuseppe's portrait, with text describing how one actor's intervention had changed an industry. Beneath it, displayed in a special case, was a set of Giuseppe's weathered tools, donated to inspire future generations. That evening, as Giuseppe adjusted his tie in the hotel mirror before the fellowship dinner, his phone chimed with a message. A photo appeared, Robert Downey Jr. wearing the Chronos Legacy while meeting the president. "Your art keeping me punctual for important meetings. Hope the first day went well." Giuseppe smiled, composing a careful reply before heading downstairs. In the elevator, another guest recognized him immediately. "You're Marchetti. My son started following watchmaking because of your story. Could I trouble you for a photo?" As Giuseppe posed with the stranger, he reflected on how completely his life had transformed, not just financially, but in purpose. His legacy now extended beyond the mechanical marvels he created to include the barriers he'd helped dismantle and the doors he'd opened for others. The true value of what happened that night wasn't measured in millions of dollars, but in recognition of a fundamental truth. Behind every object of beauty stands a creator whose name deserves to be spoken with the same reverence as the art they bring into the world.